Alright Reddit, time to fess up. What's the biggest lie you've ever told? When I was 7 and in primary school, we were in class sat on the floor and the teacher was reading something to us. I was at the back, really bored. I thought it would be funny if I fell asleep, so I lay back and pretended. About 2 minutes later, one of the other kids started to laugh and shouted for who's fallen asleep. Some other kids laughed and I thought it was going to be hilarious. The teacher stopped reading and shouted he better not be, otherwise he is in huge trouble. Oh. At this point I decided there were two options: continue to pretend and see where it goes, or wake up and get in trouble. I stayed asleep. Then things got a little crazy. The teacher tried to wake me but I held my ground. She became a little panicked, which made me even more worried to wake up. She called the headmaster. They carried me to the nurse. They called my dad and he came from work. I am still pretending and quietly crapping myself about how I am going to get out of this. Dad turns up. They call an ambulance. This was my cue. I fake waking up. They are relieved but the ambulance still comes. I spend the night in hospital. Feel really bad. I made up a story that I hit my head when playing earlier in the day. TLDR. 7 years old. Fake being asleep in school. Escalates. Spend a night in hospital. Still feel quite bad. Told my dad I faked it when I was 20. He didn't believe me. This is a great. Kid logic is so devious sometimes. A friend of mine has a running lie going with the hairdressers. The first time he went in there they thought he sounded American and asked if he was from there. His brain must have massively trolled him at that point as he replied yes. Now every time he gets his hair cut he has to talk about how much he misses America and how different England is whilst pulling off a terrible accent. It's been like 4 years. He's in too deep. It was my last quarter in college and I failed physics again. Everyone was coming down to see me graduate and have a party for me. I'd been to lots of graduations in my almost 6 years in college, so I knew that they didn't have a big list of names. You handed the announcer a slip of paper with your name on it and they read it into the microphone. Then you get an empty diploma holder and go get your diploma after the ceremony. So the morning of graduation, I went to the auditorium with my cap and gown and found a person who was telling graduates where to sit, etc. and said, OMG. I left my slip of paper at home. OMG. What can I do? And she just asked me my name, wrote it down and handed me a new slip. I walked across the stage to the cheers of my friends and family, had an awesome graduation party and everyone went home. I moved to another state and the following summer came back, took that class, and really graduated. Didn't go to that ceremony. I told my parents I was thinking about graduate school and wanted to take some classes to see if that's what I should do. Almost 20 years later and they still don't know what happened. I see no reason to tell them, ever. As a professor, I often assist in planning this type of ruse for students failing my class. They honestly appreciate the help. In the 5th grade I thought it would be cool to convince the class that I had nerve damage in my right arm and couldn't feel anything in it. Every time I told someone this they would test it out by jabbing me in the arm with a pencil or pinching me or even outright punching me, and I had to sit there with a straight face to keep up the lie. I was not a bright child. Most painful lie I ever told. They bought it though. I had a super annoying friend David who I saw almost daily in elementary school because our parents were friends and we lived down the block from each other. He was gullible and kind of stupid, and one day on a whim I convinced him that I was running an underground laboratory, a la Dexter's laboratory, from my basement, and that I was working on giving us both superpowers. I hyped it up for almost an entire year, sketching out intricate designs and taking notes on exactly how he wanted his superpowers to work. Until one day I broke the news to him that an evil rival scientist destroyed my lab and poor David would just be short and normal forever. I think I'm that David. I told the principal a big story about why I did not do my homework in 2nd grade. I explained that I had a pet alligator that shredded it up while we were playing. Little kid logic said that no one would believe that a dog ate my homework. So I brilliantly deduced that I should use the same story, but say it was an alligator. I was convincing enough that they called my parents. It took my mom about a minute to convince the principal that I had an active imagination and that there was no alligator wrestling going on. We were just wrestling. I faked being stereotypically gay so that I would get bigger tips at a restaurant where I worked. I usually got 150 a night. I don't know about my biggest, but most likely my most elaborate stupid. You know how the school report cards all have a unique font and means of preventing forgery? Nothing like modern currency, but you couldn't just pull up the font on a computer. Well, I was having a rough go of things all around from about junior high on. I think it was 9th grade, and my dad starts asking for the report card for that quarter. Knowing I'm going to get my crap kicked again for crapping out, I managed to find a whole box of old report cards in the library when we were supposed to be doing research for a book report. Score. So me being the resourceful me, grabbed a stack and tucked them away. Next day when we went back to the library, I was prepared. I had my X-Acto knife, some whiteout, scotch tape, and unlimited use of the copy machine. After careful analysis of what I would change to make it seem somewhat legit, I went to work. I had about an hour to make it happen. Having managed to avoid bloody fingerprints on the master from an X-Acto knife, a nosy librarian and teacher or students, I sat back just before the bell rang and admired my handiwork. This would pass under scrutiny. Later on I give it to my dad and sure enough, I'm in the clear. A couple months go by and my dad is going through my room and a few papers fall out of one of my jacket pockets. He opens them up and sees about 4-5 report cards, not mine, that are all hacked up for the individual letters I had used on my altered version. Busted. Funny part is, he just kind of shook his head and smiled but didn't say much. I was expecting the butt whooping of the censoring. TLDR. Doctored my report card, passed it off but got busted later by my own evidence. Moron. He isn't allowed to say it but he was very proud of you that day. Throwaway for obvious reasons. At work, electronics retail, I was called to work at the register for a while to help the line. I was trained on it, but not very thoroughly, wasn't entirely comfortable with my knowledge of protocols and such, but employer did not care. Got thrown up there anyways whenever they wanted. An older couple came through my lane, probably in their late 50s or early 60s. They were very upbeat and personable, but clearly in a rush. Didn't think too much of it since people are often in a rush around my area. They were buying large sums of gift cards and some other stuff that I don't remember. Kept saying it was their grandkid's birthday and how they were so excited. Total was about $2,500 I think. Seems like a lot but this is a very affluent area so it's not that unusual for someone to drop that much. They split the purchase onto 2 credit cards and I processed their transaction without issue. They went on their way. About a week later, a manager came to me and asked about an unusual purchase that I rang. He told me that any purchase over $200 needed to have it checked and he asked if I checked their IDs. I wasn't aware of that fact but fearing for my job at this point, I told him I did check their IDs and everything matched. Turns out the older couple was using stolen credit cards. I had to make a written statement for the police about everything that happened in the transaction, including putting the lie that I verified IDs. For months after that, I thought they would find out I lied and I would get fired. I felt awful for the people whose cards were stolen and thought they would come in and blame me for it, as they should have, but nothing happened. I remained in good standing with that employer for years. TLDR, I naively enabled credit card fraud and lied to not get fired. Dude, that is not your fault. I used to work for Staples as a technician and they would pull me out to do cashier crap all the time, and then get mad at me that I wasn't able to reach my quota. Retail sucks. And it's not because of people, it's because of the managers. Not mine, but a friend's. My friend is a pretty huge doofus, and is terrified of his parents, even though they are the nicest people I know. Anyways, he graduated and went to college and his parents were so happy for him, and since he's a rich kid they are paying for it too. After a few months he decided he couldn't do it and dropped out. It's been almost a year now and he still hasn't told his parents. He's been coming over our house whenever his parents think he's going to school. Just a few days ago he said he couldn't come over because he had to stay home and fake study for upcoming exams. I have no idea why he's so afraid to tell his parents. His parents are understanding people and he's making it worse by not telling them. I keep asking him what he's going to do if the school calls or I dunno, doesn't freaking graduate. His response is always I'll figure it out when the time comes. It may not have occurred to you, but his parents might be the kind of people who put on a happy face for outsiders, but are not actually that nice. I told a girl I was dating that I was getting deployed because I was too big of a wuss to tell her that she was freaking weird and possessive. 2 months later I actually did get deployed. Calm as a bee. I told all my friends in 1st grade that I was a Mexican princess and that my dad owned a helicopter. I wanted to explain why we didn't have a car. I didn't want to say it was because we didn't have any money to buy a car, or a garage to put it in. In the 5th grade my teacher was asking everyone if they were from another country. I wasn't, but on an insane whim I claimed that I was. I'm from Denmark, I said, looking around the room proudly. My teacher raised an eyebrow, but noted it on whatever she was doing and moved on. After that a bunch of kids gathered around me and asked about Denmark. I said I barely remembered it because we moved to America when I was 5. A teacher's aide kind of guy walked up and asked if my parents spoke Danish. I gave him a condescending look and said, no, they speak Denmarkian. The guy was puzzled, but he was either too shamed by the children's laughter or too kind to call me on it. I suppose I'll never know. The best part happened weeks later, when I told my friend which girl I'd arbitrarily decided I had a crush on. Her friend overheard and rushed to tell her. Sarah, she said, acting way too excited about the whole thing. Old Chili has a crush on you. No, 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 I said, thinking fast. I said Kara, not Sarah. Kara was the girl in Denmark who I loved. I haven't seen her since we moved here, and I missed her. The kids were skeptical, but I painted such a romantic picture of our love that they didn't stay that way very long. To this day, I have never told anyone in my 5th grade class that I'm not from Denmark. Not a super big deal, but I told my very Catholic mom that I was going to the church for adoration, and in reality I just went to some girl's house for a makeout session. I stand firmly by my decision that night. You are one brave man. I once lied in school that I was related to Elvis. Yep, the Elvis Presley. My proof, I sang Love Me Tender as deep as I could. Yeah, they didn't believe me. Could have been because I was a little 7-year-old Swedish girl. See, I find this funny, because I read this in an American baritone voice, and as soon as I read little 7-year-old Swedish girl, the voice started changing for each new piece of information. It was like a dude hitting negative puberty and turning into a girl. Girlfriend of 6 years, lived together most of the time, lied to me about her age, said she was a year older than she really was, started with the lie, didn't want to admit it, wrote it out. Weird. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, we would often visit my great-great-grandmother at the nursing home she lived at. She was 106 years old. I didn't know her well and she didn't talk much. Often she would be sleeping. She loved to see me though. Something about the youth made her so happy. I was terrified of her. I didn't understand why she looked so sick and frail, and I thought she smelled bad. I was young and didn't understand. My family asked me to hug and give her a kiss on the cheek or forehead. I feigned trying to do so but pretended I couldn't reach over the crib like guardrails on the side of her bed. I never saw her again. I regret this lie very much. Don't feel guilty, you were very young and shelved you no matter what. I used to go to a Scientology school where they teach you study methods of L. Ron Hubbard, but not the religion, because L. Ron Hubbard was such a sci-fi fan. He believed that the human brain worked like a computer. When you come across a word you don't understand, you malfunction and show signs, such as yawning and not wanting to study. I used to open the dictionary and yawn, give the supervisor a thumbs up. There are not teachers, only supervisors at this school. Everything is self-taught. To pretend I looked up a word. You should do an AMA. I've never heard of a school like that. I once told my dad that the smell in my room was because of the gardener who mowed the lawn and some hot grass clippings got in through the window. Yeah, I was high. He knew. The guy in the truck that just drove past threw a cigarette out the window. When I was 5 or so, my dad and siblings were up shooting in the mountains. I found a book of matches in his trunk and proceeded to light some grass on fire. California in the summer equals very dry. My dad unsuccessfully attempted to put it out with a blanket. I had never seen fire spread so quick. Couple 1,000-acre fire was caused by me and me alone. I still feel terrible about it. I read that as my dad and siblings were shooting up in the mountains and it completely altered my perception of that story. I told my tennis team, all my friends, and my girlfriend that I was going to California for spring break so I wouldn't have to play in 5 days worth of tennis matches and waste my holiday. Picked up golf and met some great new friends, had one of the best mini vacations of my life. That is the whitest lie ever. When I was a senior in high school, I jumped my car, bottomed out and destroyed the oil pan and some other stuff. Told my dad some butthole moved a roadblock sign from a pothole. I owned up recently. I am so ashamed of this story. I was on a cleanse where you only drink lemonade blah blah blah, and I hadn't eaten in 3 days, so you can imagine how grumpy I was. My husband had called me earlier that day to tell me he had to take our car into the shop again and that it was going to cost us another $300. This car had been nothing but trouble since the day we bought it and I was not happy about it. So my mom picks me up from work and takes me to the auto shop and I march into the lobby and start shrieking at the man at the counter, literally at the top of my lungs, F-bombs everywhere and calling him all kinds of names in front of everyone because we just had our car fixed and why is this still an issue? The man is calm and politely asks me to stop yelling at him. At this point I storm off and start crying in my mom's car. She tries to console me but I am hysterical. I realize how pathetic I am being, so I demand she go and tell the man I am pregnant because there is no other excuse for my behavior, as if screaming at a stranger isn't pathetic enough. She reluctantly tells the man, but she is also shamed by my behavior and wants to save face. Then, the unthinkable happens. The man comes out to the car, where I am crying, and he hugs me. He tells me his daughter just had a baby and he knows about the mood swings and that everything will get better. Then he prays for me, pats my head and gives me a discount on my car repairs. I am going to heck. See, this is why we eat food instead of just drinking sugar water. Frick a throwaway. I'm not proud, but I am honest. Last year, my junior year of high school, I broke up with my girlfriend of a year and a half. In teen time, that was forever. We broke up in October, and in November I got a call. Apparently she was pregnant, and I was floored. I was 16. I wasn't ready to have kids. I had a life to lead, especially because she was bonkers. I wasn't a man about it. I avoided her and the potential of fatherhood, and I lied to my parents for literally 3 months. I wanted an abortion. Judge me as you will, and she wanted the kid. At some point, I had to tell them and face their disappointment. Then I got a text mid-December. She had miscarried, and I wasn't going to be a father. She told her friends that I was apparently relieved that it happened, and word found its way back to my mom. She confronted me on New Year's Eve. I told her everything and her only question was, why didn't you tell us? Why lie and say you were fine? I told them I didn't want to disappoint them. My mom told me the only reason I'm disappointed is because you didn't tell us sooner. Moral of the story, I don't lie to them anymore, because they show nothing but support. The entire situation redefined me. It made me grow up and accept responsibility for my actions. You don't value youth until it could be taken away. 3 friends and I told some guys at the flea market that our parents were dead, so they'd let us buy really cool ninja weapons. It ended poorly. I hope nobody got a ninja star in their eye. No, this closeted bi guy and I aren't dating. He likes girls, and I don't date straight guys. Technically, everything I would say was true without revealing the truth. I hate dating closet cases. It feels like they're ashamed of me. Never again, man. Never again. My family thinks I'm happy and at such a good place in my life when I'm actually at my lowest and not knowing what to do with myself. I'm extremely positive with them just so they don't give me speeches. Oh hi, I think we're the same exact person. I said that I beat Temple Run to a high school buddy. At 50 million points, you go into an underground cavern. At 100 million, you go back above ground. At 150 million, you jump into a US military chopper and fly off into the distance. Everyone I told believed me until someone googled it a month later. I still think a few people actually believed it. I have yet to get past 1.5 million. I can't wait to see the underground cavern. I almost hope this gets buried. There was this friend of mine in high school who wasn't really a friend of mine. One of those kids you know, and your friends like, but you just can't freaking stand. Let's call him H. Well, he was dating this chick that I always had the bonus for, let's call her R. So I start talking to H and getting all buddy and crap, and eventually this dude I don't like at all considers me his best friend. Q phase 2. I start talking to R, coercing her and crap, and eventually I let out a string of lies about how H has been cheating on her for months, but that because I cared about her, I couldn't let it go on without her knowing. Phase 3. R tells H he knows he's been cheating and that I told her. H says that he knows me better than that, and that I wouldn't make up some lie, and H begins accusing R of trying to make him turn on his best friend. Inevitably they break up. I proceed to bang this girl for like 3 months while she's in the off-on state with H. TL. DR. 16-year-old me is a freaking butthole, but I admire his determination. Sociopathic manipulation for the win. I have a birthmark in the center of my palm that vaguely resembles a gunshot wound or any kind of puncture wound. I've made up a story about how my dad took me to a range and I got shot in the hand, and now have wires in my hand Luke Skywalker style. They inevitably ask about an exit wound, so I say I have skin grafts on the back of my hand that just look so good because they've been on there for so long. It's gotten me many phone numbers. I also used it to get free food once. A cashier at a McDonald's in Maryland thought I was the second coming of Jesus, so I rolled with it and got my Big Mac meal for free, as well as blessed his family and stuff. I'm now fairly certain that if there was a god, I'd be going to heck. After a college friend threw gum out the window of a car, I told her that turtles eat it and die because they can't spit. She felt awful for the next year, mostly because I always reminded her, until the last month or so of school when I told her the truth. Turtles love gum. I'm not married. That's not a completely accurate statement, but it's a decent enough quick summary. Basically, I got involved in an online relationship when I was 16. I was living in England, the woman in California. Come 18, and the relationship still ongoing. I decided that it would be an absolutely brilliant idea to move to the US to be together when I finished up the 2-year college course I was taking. The problem was that I knew there was no way that my family would be in support of this plan. Their argument being that I was too young and had too much growth yet to do before making a commitment like that they would turn out to be correct. So I did it without telling them. I planned out the whole visa application without telling them the truth about how I was getting into the country. I honestly don't remember exactly what I told them. I'm 99% certain that at least my dad saw through it just before I left the country. He outright told me not to do anything so stupid as to go off and get married. Lied to his face. Told him I wouldn't. In my stupid teenage mind, the plan was to just proceed as if we weren't married, then have a ceremony a few years down the line and pretend like that was when we got married for basically forever. No, the concept of how to keep the two families from talking ever entered our heads. The marriage eventually fell apart, as was inevitable, in hindsight. As an act of spite, once it did, my ex-wife contacted my mum and told her everything. She immediately flew over with my grandmother, the first time I'd seen them in about 4 years, for one of the most awkward, painful conversations of my entire life. In the end, it all worked out for the best. I'm still living in the US as a permanent resident, having been here for 10 years now. I'm currently trying to get the funds together to take the citizenship test and have built a great life here. But knowing how badly I hurt my family by doing that is something that's weighed heavily on my ever since and probably always will. TL. DR. Lied about being married to my family. Ex-wife told them when marriage fell apart. The biggest best lie I ever told actually kept me from getting an underage. My buddy and I were drinking at his house. We were both 19. About 2:30 AM we both decide we are hungry. Instead of driving, we decide to walk the mile to the nearest convenience store. We get there, get our snacks, and start to head back. About 50 feet outside of the convenience store we both decide we have to take a pee. Instead of walking back to the bathrooms outside the convenience store, we decide to pee in some trees beside an old trailer. This is when the cops show up. Turns out somebody in a nearby house thought we were prowling and were trying to rob the convenience store. The cops ask for IDs, but me and my buddy both say we don't have any. total lie, and that we don't even have anything that says our name. We both tell the officers that we are our older brothers because they are both over 21. This is when one of the officers asks us how we paid for our food. This is when I frick up. I tell them I paid with a bank card, which has my name on it, and not the name of my brother. As soon as I say this, the officer asks for the card and immediately sees that I gave him a different name. He then calls us out on not having it. Once the officer has our IDs, he starts yelling at us and asking why we lied to him about who we were. I tell him that I have an Army Special Forces contract lined up and I am supposed to leave in a week. I then embellish a little and say that this is the night of my going away party and that the guy with me was my best friend who arranged the whole party. If I got in trouble for anything, especially drinking underage, I would lose my contract and my family would kill me. Upon hearing this, the officers immediately let us go, wish me luck, and warn us not to stop and pee anywhere on the way home. TLDR. About to get an underage. Tell the cops I am going to the military. Get off scot-free. I wasn't a very popular girl in high school. I'd do some really quite pathetic things to get attention. Makes me feel awful thinking about it tbh. But during high school I pretended to have gotten pregnant by the most popular guy in school. It was nice for a while. People actually started to talk to me. I wasn't really pregnant. I was still a virgin. But then it turned out the guy I said got me pregnant didn't actually exist. 2 students made him up, and it just spiraled out of control. Seriously, the entire school was convinced he was real. Needless to say, everyone was hating on the kids that made this guy up pretty hard. It got pretty serious. At one stage the kids had to get escorted from classes by a teacher. They even had their own table in each classroom, so the teacher could keep an eye on them and make sure they were alright. But then everything went back to normal, and gradually everyone went back to not knowing who I was. Very original. Wish I could hear the story from the guys who made up the fake dude. I once convinced my entire high school a student that wasn't real existed. I got the idea from Mash and my friend and I created this kid out of thin air, and for the rest of the semester we got everything we could think of blamed on this kid. It got to the point that people were saying how awesome he was, and a pregnant girl even claimed that her baby was his just to get some attention. When we eventually did come clean about making him up, no one believed us for more than a month because everyone claimed to have met this awesome dude at a party or in the library, and also the one chick who was sure she was having his kid. Turns out the guy she hooked up with just used the name we made up to get into her pants. People eventually got so angry at my friend and I for claiming he wasn't real that we actually had to have a teacher escort us to and from classes because people were trying to beat the crap out of us. The school administration finally convinced everyone by offering the students a reward to come forward, and sure enough he didn't. Although I can't imagine who would have come forward for the low price of $3.50. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.